Could we see a blockbuster trade between the Lightning and the Capitals, and will it make sense? We'll discuss the possibility proposed by a recent article. Plus, we're going to take a look at an update on the Connor Garland trade, rumors out of Vancouver, what's going on with Shea and Pinto in Ottawa. We have fairly big news from the waiver wire, including 3 players on waivers. Going to discuss a rumor regarding Kevin Lebanc and waivers earlier today that didn't quite pan out. As well, the Ottawa Senators are rumored to be bringing back Craig Anderson to retire as a Sen. We'll discuss all that and several injury updates coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover here today. There is a news video out from earlier today with a few quick items, one of which I want to update. We discussed in that video a report from Daily Faceoff's Frank Saravalli saying that the Sharks were placing Kevin Lebanc on waivers. Now, before I recorded that video, he had put out new information saying that upon Lebanc and his agent being informed that they were placing him on waivers, that after that happened, that somehow the Sharks changed their mind and they weren't going to be placing him on waivers, instead placing him into the lineup tonight for the first time this season. So I'm sure we'll have to wait and see what Saravalli has to say about this. So far, from Sharks media, they've asked about Lebanc and the coaching staff. Nobody seems to know anything about Lebanc, being considered for waivers or what any of that stuff was going on. So, be curious to see what Frank has to update us on that story. But Lebanc is not on waivers 100% now. When I recorded that video, it was not quite 2 o'clock Eastern time yet, so the official waivers news hadn't broken. But based on what Frank was saying, at one point he was going on waivers and then he wasn't, so it wasn't really clear. But it's a weird scenario there. Not sure what's going on, but I'd be curious to see when we find out more, or if we do. Like I said, the Ottawa Senators today also are rumored to be bringing back Craig Anderson. A report from TSN's Darren Dreger saying that likely next week when the Sens are home to the Buffalo Sabres, who Craig Anderson finished up his career with, expected to have Anderson come in and sign a one-day deal and retire as a Senator, and he'll be honored on that game, which would be great to see. Also, Anderson's been confirmed by the Sabres today. They did announce that he's been hired to be what they call a hockey liaison, which is a unique title, I guess, but he has been around the team a little bit on a part-time basis, basically just kind of helping the young guys out, especially the goalies, where they have some younger guys like Levi and UPL and stuff, around the team. They could use a mentor like Anderson, who seemed to enjoy his time in Buffalo the last year or so that he was there to finish out his career. So I'm glad to see Andy staying in the game. He's a great personality, had a great career, was an underdog who made it and had a good decade run with the Senators. So that's quite happy to see that taking place. We'll get the official news from the Sens probably sometime in the next few days. A couple other updates that we talked about earlier. Steven Stamkos comes back tonight. Nate Schmidt's going to be a healthy scratch. Ovechkin was held shotless for the second straight game last night, first time in his career. Can the Capitals get things going? That's going to be a big story to follow here as we kind of see him chase down Gretzky's record. And are the Capitals going to be a lottery team this year? Like, what? They're not trending in a good direction at this point. We do have some official news from the waiver wire, which are interesting as well. We have 3 players on waivers. The Sharks did place a player on waivers, but it's not Lebanc. It's Radim Simic is on waivers today. So we'll see what happens there. The Penguins have MacEwen Harkins on waivers. Of course, they picked him up not long ago from the Winnipeg Jets. So at this point, they need a centerman. Noel Acciari is injured. I don't think he's going to be out too long, but he is expected to miss some time by the looks of things. And Harkins is a winger, not a center, so they need to call somebody up, so they needed a space. And so far, I guess with Harkins, they just kind of been not that they're not fond of him, but it's just it hasn't quite worked. He hasn't really shown that he's really been able to grab the spot that they brought him in to see if he could do that. So at this point, they're kind of willing to take the chance that they lose him. Of course, now if Winnipeg is the only team to put in a claim, if they do that, they can take him back and send him directly to the minors on their organization. But if there's multiple claims, then he'd go to another team before he'll go back to the Jets. So they will have an opportunity. And I guess one of the bigger surprises today on waivers is the Ottawa Senators placing forward Zach MacEwen on waivers. So certainly this raised a lot of questions. Is this about Pinto? What is this about? Well, to kind of give you the lowdown, this is a simple solution. In last night's game, Artem Zub got hurt. Now, I did talk about that in an earlier video as well. We haven't been given a definite update from the team, but it was a shot from Ovechkin, and I couldn't quite tell if it was Ovechkin's stick or if after he released the puck, if the puck kind of rode up his stick, but he got hit in the ear. And you could hear him yelp when it hit him. And, it's one of those areas that's quite sensitive. And there was some blood on the ice, so whatever, it did cut him. We haven't been told. He left the game, but at that point, the Sens were well in control. It was either 5 or 6-1. I can't remember how many goals the Sens were up at that point. But, there was no need for him to try to come back, even if he could. So, clearly, DJ Smith, all he said was that he didn't think it would be anything long-term, but it's early to say, right? So, at this point, I think this is probably more of a case of them needing to call up a defenseman more than it is about Pinto. Because at this point, they're so tight to the cap, they don't have any extra D. They had exactly 6D, but they did have 13 forwards. So at this point, they had between Parker Kelly, Mark Kastelik, Rourke Chartier, and Zach MacEwen. One of them was going to have to sit out all the time now that Josh Norris is back, because that was the other big thing that happened in last night's game. Josh Norris made his return. MacEwen was out of the lineup last night. And obviously, if you take a look at it, see, he kind of becomes a bit of a victim of the numbers game and what his other teammates bring. MacEwen pretty much is a one-trick pony. He's not a fantastic hockey player. I like him as a utility-type guy, in a way. He could serve a purpose. Seems like a good dude, hard-working guy from PEI, which is always a good thing in my books, but at the same time, not a fantastic hockey player. If you want him there as a fighter, as a deterrent, a muscle, okay. But the fact that the Senators signed him to a 3-year deal at league minimum was a head-scratcher. The fact they signed him wasn't a head-scratcher, but the fact they gave him 3 years was weird. But I guess, the good part is that the contract can be fully buried in the minors. It doesn't have to be a cap impact, but it's still, on the books and still money out the door if it doesn't work out, right? So, Zach MacEwen, the odd man out. If you look at the other options they have for their fourth line, Rourke Chartier plays on the penalty kill. Parker Kelly plays on the penalty kill. Mark Kastelik is one of their top guys on faceoffs. So they all bring something that they don't really want out of the lineup if they can help it, whereas MacEwen's there just to be a deterrent. As much as that can be needed and still, prove valuable at times, it's a little easier to put him out of the lineup depending on who you're playing. So he goes on waivers, and the fact that he's at a 3-year contract, I would think would mean that it's unlikely he's going to get picked up. He can go down to the minors in Belleville, and they can bring him back up when they're able, when they need him, and when they can do it. Because obviously they still have the Pinto situation to sort out, which we're going to talk about in a minute here as well. So I think this is more than anything about needing a defenseman to call up to replace Zub. So that tells me that Zub's going to probably miss a little bit of time. Now, if the Zub injury drags on longer and whatever, then maybe it becomes more of a different issue that could assist in the Pinto situation, but I don't think that's really going to be the case because they only have around $62,000 in cap space. They can't call anybody up. They'd have to play a player short, and really to play with only 5 defensemen, that's not really ideal. A little easier if you have to go 11 forwards, but going 5D for a full game, not really ideal, especially when their next 2 opponents are division rivals, Detroit and Buffalo. Detroit's off to a good start like them, so they're going to want to be at their best to try to take those 2 points from them if they are able to, right? So certainly not ideal to go with 5 defensemen. So MacEwen goes on waivers. They'll call up a defenseman. They have to obviously call up a D that's going to be within the cap space that'll be provided. MacEwen's demotion, should he clear or be picked up, will give them an extra $775 on top of the 62 and change that they already have. So they have 3 or 4 defensemen that are making around the $800K mark, which would fit. Could be Bernard Docker, could be Matt and Paolo, Gannett, any of those guys could be called up. So that's likely what we're going to see here in that case. As I mentioned, Josh Norris did make his return last night, which kind of made a forward expendable anyway. He scored 2 goals, including a power play marker. Seemed like he was really no limitations, had great skating, good on face-offs, took some bumps, scored some goals, fit in well in the power play. It was like he was never missing time. He'd been out for 270 days. Had great chemistry with Drake Batherson, which he's had for some time. They've played a ton together since they both turned pro. So ultimately, it was all in all a great evening. for the Sens outside of the Zub injury. But when it comes to Shane Pinto, there is word that there's some kind of theatrics going on, if you will. Largely, I think, because of his agent. At the end of the day, it's hard to imagine. I know I see the fan base seems to be divided here on wanting to put blame on the team for not taking care of the Sooner. And I'm not saying the team is completely innocent here with how they've handled the transaction. But you got to remember something. The agent, Louis Gross, is notorious and has tons of history with almost all of his clients, or a large chunk of them, holding out. Or holding out may not be the proper term, but like missing time. Like, withholding services to get the contract they want. Nylander did it, Gaudreau did it, Sandin did it, and the list goes on. This is just another example of that. So who's to say, because we don't really know everything. We only hear rumors that get out through insiders and whatnot. Who's to say that the Senators haven't made a very fair offer and they're just not accepting it? Right? So the word on the street is that the Senators have a trade that's in place. It's already agreed to. They don't want to execute the trade until Pinto and his agent verbally agree to the contract, of course. It's supposed to be a multi-year deal that they feel is fair. Now, we don't know the exact number on it. It's reportedly somewhere between $2 and $2.5 million, which would be in the wheelhouse of what he would want. For 2 years, I believe, is what the rumor is. So at this point, they're not accepting the contract, which is why the trade hasn't been executed, which is why he's not there. He's now missing paychecks. He's seeing Ridley Gregg basically take his spot, play extremely well on a line with Vladimir Tarasenko, who's putting up 3 consecutive multi-point games to start the year. Gregg's got a point-per-game status. I mean, Pinto's got to be itching to get in here before it gets to the point that Ottawa right now, like I said, they've won 3 straight. They're playing well. They've got a guy in his spot that's doing well. And they do have, obviously, the leverage where he doesn't have any, didn't have the ability to go through arbitration or anything of that nature. And clearly, Pinto wants to be there. He has not requested a trade up to this point. I really think that it's more so the agent playing hardball more than anything. Now, could that change? It could always change. Now, based on Elliotte Friedman and Jeff Merrick's conversation on the Jeff Merrick show today regarding that and the history of Louis Gross, I personally wouldn't be completely shocked if Pinto either said to his agent, like, get this done, I'm going to accept this deal, or he moves on and gets a new agent. If you can't get the deal done, I'll get somebody else to do it, type of thing. So, Friedman said he believes, in his opinion, that it's going to sort itself out in the next few days. So we will see where things go, but the Pinto situation has gotten a little bit more interesting. And like I said, that's the latest word on that. So we'll see. Now, a few other updates as well. A couple other things too regarding some injuries. So we also seen the Minnesota Wild place Alex Goligoski on LTIR. They've also recalled Sammy Walker to go corresponding move that to make the space. So obviously it'll get another young defenseman up to get a chance to play. And the Capitals have officially placed, even though he's been hurt for a little bit, backup goalie Charlie Lindgren to injured reserve. And they've called up a defenseman, which is Hardy Actel. So hopefully they'll get a chance to play. I'm surprised they called up a defenseman, though, based on their lineup last night. Unless there was another injury that happened in last night's game that wasn't really obvious during gameplay. I'm not really sure. We'll see about that. Now, I came across an article today on HockeyWriters.com that, and this is not a rumored deal. This is just a one writer's opinion. But this writer's convinced that the Lightning and the Capitals should pull off a blockbuster deal, and it would be good for both franchises. And here is, and I'll link it down in the top pinned comment down below so you can read through it yourself if you want. I will give you my thoughts after we say what the suggested deal is and see what we think. So, because of the fact that Steven Stamkos is obviously unhappy with the fact that he has not been offered an extension, and at this point, he's not going to be offered an extension, at the very least till the end of the season. Once Tampa's season is over, they will evaluate how they did as a team, how Stamkos did as a player, and decide what they want to do from there. Now, I do expect them that they will make offers to sign Stamkos. I have no doubt. And I have no doubt as well that it's everybody's first choice and preference to make him a Lightning player for the rest of his career. First and foremost, up front. That's my belief. Now, whether or not they get a deal done is a completely different story. The language from Julian Breezeball, the GM of the Lightning, tells us that it's far from a guarantee that happens. At this point, they They feel that, based on my opinion, based on his comments, is that he feels that Stamkos, even though he's older, is still very productive, still a really good player, and that essentially if he has an option to scour the market, that he's probably going to be offered a lot more money somewhere else than what he'll get in Tampa because of their tight cap situation, the fact that they've been a successful team, they've had salary cap issues and cuts that they've had to make because of their cap issues, which comes with every successful franchise in NHL nowadays. That I guess they're probably convinced he's gonna have to take a big discount to stay. That's kind of where things are at with them. So it's hard to say. Now, we also know that Evgeny Kuznetsov in Washington has been a player that's been rumored to be needing a fresh start for some time, been asked about getting traded for the last 2 years. But at the same time, we also heard some interviews he did this past offseason. It sounds like the fact that they had a new head coach in Spencer Carberry, a new style of play and all that he was very interested in making it work and seeing how things worked out. But so far, it's only been 3 games, but things are not working out in the U.S. Capitol. The Capitals are washed, if you will. They don't look good. They look old. They look slow. They need a change of pace. Now, Stamkos isn't really a younger player by any means, but he's playing at a much higher level than what we've seen out of the Capitals so far. Now, he's currently injured too, but expected back tonight, as we talked about earlier. So the deal here is that suggested in this article is that the Lightning, because they can't afford to keep Stamkos and might have an issue with re-signing him, trade him to Washington, which obviously he'd have to agree to because of his trade protection, and it would also be a case of Washington signing him to an extension. They recommend it for like 4 or 5 year extension in exchange for Kuznetsov, Connor McMichael, and a couple of draft picks. Now, they said that obviously with Stamkos being a higher level player than Kuznetsov and the fact that they're going to get an extension out of it, that's going to take more than Kuznetsov. That's why they suggested a good young player like McMichael and some picks. Now, if I'm Washington, I probably don't really want to trade Connor McMichael. Would I be interested in Stamkos? Absolutely, I would. If I could move on from Kuznetsov and get Stamkos, I'm interested so far. If I'm Washington, if I'm GM Brian McClellan, I'm all ears to this. So we'll see where it goes, but I'd be hesitant to part with McMichael. I'd probably try to figure out a different asset in there, and obviously the picks. Well, it's hard to say. I think you recommend a first and a second. So that's you're going to need your first round pick, though, is the problem. If I'm Washington, I'm probably not trading a first either, because at this rate, the season has started poorly. You might be a lottery team, and what if that pick ends up fairly high? You got to protect that. So if I'm trading a first, I'm making sure that there's protection on it, saying that if it's top 10 or top 15, that I get to defer a year. And maybe they go for that. I don't know. But with Tampa, if they came to the point that they're not going to, or came to the conclusion that we're not going to be able to re-sign Stamkos, and they decide, okay, we'll consider this, would they do that deal? I don't know. They only have a short stretch left on Kuznetsov's contract. So, he's a good player, but hasn't lived up to it. You get a good young player in McMichael, some picks. I don't know. I'm not really sure that they do. It's an okay deal, but are they going to want Kuznetsov? That's the question. I don't necessarily know that they would. So, to me, I think this is a great deal for Washington, as long as the provisions are there to protect the first rounder, and maybe you try to figure out a way to keep McMichael and work on another prospect instead. But at the same time, like, you look at the trajectory of Connor McMichael the last couple of years, he's projecting like he should be able to be a regular NHL player, but they do have some more picks coming that look pretty good, like Andrew Crystal and stuff. So I don't know, but you're going to need some youth, right? This team needs to turn over the roster and head in the other direction age-wise in the next little bit, or they're going to be really screwed when, some of these guys retire. They've still got Ovechkin and Backstrom for quite a bit. Ovi hasn't scored yet. Like, this team's in trouble, possibly, if they don't get things turned around and fast. So, like I said, you can't win the Stanley Cup in the first 2 months of the year, but you can lose it quick and lose the ability to make the playoffs. Even by November 1st, stats say by November 1, if you are more than 4 points out of a playoff spot, you only have a 15% chance of getting in. So even if you have a terrible October and you're more than like, you're probably not catching up. There's a lot of 3-point games. Like it's hard. So we'll see. I'm not convinced this is the deal we're going to see. I want to get everybody's opinion on it based on this article just being interesting. So let me know your thoughts. Is this something that Tampa and Washington should consider pulling off as a blockbuster deal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.